My name is Sarah Ellis. I'm 43 years old and a surgeon at a prestigious medical center. I've built my career on years of sleepless nights, dedication, and sacrifice. I've saved lives, made tough decisions, and led teams of medical professionals through crises that most people would never even imagine. But none of that matters to my family. The day of my father's memorial service, I stood outside the church, dressed in my surgical scrubs, the fabric stiff against my skin. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground, but I didn't feel its warmth. Instead, I felt the cold sting of being rejected, invisible, and utterly alone. I had driven all the way there, hoping that for once things would be different. Maybe they'd see me as something more than just the person who wasn't around enough, the one who was always too busy saving strangers to be with them. Maybe they'd finally acknowledge my accomplishments. After all, I had earned every inch of the success I'd built. But when I arrived at the church, I was greeted with the sight of the doors closing in my face. The family, my mother, my sister, everyone, had already gathered inside. My sister Rebecca, the golden child, stood at the front, talking with relatives and friends. She was radiant, of course, the picture of everything my parents had always hoped for. She had the perfect life, the perfect marriage, the perfect image. I hadn't even been able to get through the doors before I heard my mother's voice calling out from inside, sharp and clear as if cutting through the air. "Sarah isn't allowed in here. We don't need her to tarnish the family name." The words stung, but I had been hearing them for years, so I should have been used to it by now. I stood frozen for a moment, the weight of their rejection pressing down on me like a physical force. My heart clenched, and I fought the urge to turn around and leave. It would have been easier, wouldn't it? Just to go home and pretend I hadn't driven 3 hours for nothing. But something kept me there, standing just out of sight, watching through the church windows. Inside, my family mingled, their laughter a sickening reminder of how they never truly saw me. My mother's laugh, so high-pitched and fake, echoed in the distance, while Rebecca stood proudly by their side, soaking in the attention like she always did. I bit back the words that bubbled up, fighting the emotions that tried to overtake me. They had never seen me as anything but the failure. I could never do enough, be enough for them. And even now, at my father's memorial, I wasn't enough to be included in the family picture. That's when it happened. A group of 12 people walked toward the church, all of them in surgical scrubs. I recognized the faces immediately. Doctors, nurses, specialists, my colleagues, the people who respected my work and who, for the first time in my life, made me feel like I mattered. Leading them was Dr. Thomas, my mentor, a renowned surgeon, and the man who had shaped much of my career. As they approached the church, Dr. Thomas spotted me standing outside, looking lost and out of place. Without missing a beat, he smiled and gave me a small nod. The rest of the group followed suit, and together they walked toward the doors. It wasn't just that they were there, it was the silent, unspoken acknowledgement. They had come for me, not for the family, not for my father, but for me, for what I had accomplished, for what I had done, for who I had become. When they reached the doors, Dr. Thomas stopped and turned to me. "We're not going in without you," he said, his voice quiet but firm. The other doctors and nurses nodded in agreement. For a moment, I stood there, unsure how to react. The weight of everything, the rejection, the years of fighting for their approval, hung in the air. But then I realized that it didn't matter anymore. Not the judgment of my mother, not the insults from my sister, not their dismissal of everything I had worked for. With a deep breath, I straightened my back and followed them inside, my colleagues flanking me like a shield. And just like that, for the first time in my life, I felt seen. The moment I stepped through the church doors, I could feel the weight of their eyes on me. My mother's gaze, cold and dismissive, lingered in the back of the room. Rebecca, with her perfect hair and flawless dress, didn't even look up. They had already moved on without me, as they always had. The service began, and I sat in the back with my colleagues, feeling more like an outsider than I ever had in my life. Dr. Thomas and the others took their seats around me, their presence oddly comforting. They didn't need to say anything, just being there by my side spoke volumes. They saw me, they respected me, but that didn't stop the nagging ache in my chest. It had been this way for as long as I could remember. No matter how much I achieved, how many accolades I received, how many lives I saved, my family never acknowledged me. It was always Rebecca who received the praise, the admiration. She was the perfect daughter, the one who followed the family's business legacy, who made everyone proud. I glanced at Rebecca across the room, standing next to my parents as they greeted people. Her smile was radiant, as always. She was everything they wanted in a daughter, and I was the one they had ignored, the one they never quite understood. I remembered the years I spent excelling in school. I was the top of my class, the one who stayed up late studying, who earned scholarships, who made my way through medical school with blood, sweat, and tears. But whenever I came home to visit, it was never enough. My parents barely looked up from their business meetings when I told them about my achievements. "That's nice, Sarah," my mom would say, barely glancing at me before returning to her spreadsheets. My dad, too busy with work, would grunt and nod as if acknowledging me was a burden. Meanwhile, Rebecca who barely had to try, was the star of the family. When she finished college with a degree in marketing, they threw her a lavish party. When she opened her first design studio, they boasted about it to everyone they knew. And no matter how much I did, it was never enough. I was always the one who had to prove myself, to earn my place at the table. I watched as Rebecca laughed with my parents and their friends, how easy it seemed for her. The effortless charm, the constant approval. She was never questioned, never scrutinized. It was always Sarah, the disappointment, the one who chose a career that tarnished the family name. I shifted in my seat, my fingers tightening around the edge of the pew. My thoughts spiraled. I was angry, frustrated, but more than that, I felt invisible. It was as if everything I had accomplished, everything I had fought for, meant nothing to them. To my family, I would always be the girl who walked away from the family business to pursue something they thought was beneath them. I remembered sending them postcards from the exotic places I traveled for medical missions, each one carefully picked to share a piece of the world I was experiencing. I'd buy small gifts, local trinkets or souvenirs, and send them with a note, hoping they'd take notice, hoping that one day they'd see me. But they never did. They'd send a brief thank you note or an email, and that was it. No recognition of the work I was doing. No pride in what I had achieved. Just empty words, hollow responses. And it hurt. It hurt more than I could put into words. Back then, I'd still try to earn their approval, thinking that if I just worked harder, if I just achieved more, I could make them proud. But it never worked. No matter how high I climbed, I would never be Rebecca. I would never be what they wanted me to be. And somewhere along the way, I stopped trying to be. I looked at my phone, checking the time. The service was dragging on, and my mind was elsewhere. My colleagues were whispering quietly amongst themselves, exchanging glances as if they could feel the tension I was radiating. They didn't know the full story, but I appreciated their quiet presence. For once, I didn't feel like I had to prove myself. When the service ended, I lingered at the back, letting the others leave before I did. I didn't want to face them, my family. My mother would probably offer some awkward condolence, but I knew she wasn't sorry. My dad would likely just nod, pretending like everything was fine. And Rebecca would act like nothing had changed, as always, too wrapped up in her perfect life to notice the pain she'd caused. As I stepped outside, I found myself standing alone in the parking lot, the sound of voices echoing in the distance. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. For a brief moment, I felt free. Free from their expectations, free from their judgment. But then my phone buzzed again. I picked it up, and as I read the message, my heart sank. It was from Dr. Thomas, asking if I was okay. I responded with a quick, "I'm fine." But the truth was, I wasn't fine. I hadn't been fine for a long time. I was tired of chasing approval that would never come, tired of always being the one who had to give, who had to prove herself. It was time for me to stop chasing them. It was time for me to start living for myself. The next few days after the memorial service felt like a blur. I threw myself into work, just as I always did. It was easier that way. Focus on something, anything, other than the ache in my chest. My patients, my surgeries, my responsibilities were always there, waiting for me. But even in the sterile environment of the hospital, I couldn't escape the feeling of being unseen. I had just finished a long shift in the OR when I returned to my apartment, exhausted but relieved to have a moment to myself. I tossed my coat and bag onto the kitchen counter, peeled off my scrubs, and sank into the couch, the weight of the day pulling me down. I had a few hours before my next round of calls and surgeries, so I decided to catch up on some paperwork. It wasn't until I checked my bank account that I first felt something shift inside me, a quiet, unsettling discomfort that quickly escalated into confusion and then pure fury. I had saved diligently over the years, kept my finances in order, and invested carefully. My accounts were typically pristine, the kind of numbers that reflected hard work, sacrifice, and meticulous planning. But tonight, they were different. Unauthorized transactions, small at first but then bigger ones, were popping up. A couple hundred here, 1,000 there. I blinked and rechecked the numbers, but they didn't change. The amounts were flowing into accounts I didn't recognize, accounts that I would later trace back to my family. My heart sank as the realization hit. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a hack. This was deliberate. I sat up, quickly pulling up my transaction history. There it was, a steady stream of transfers made while I was away on one of my humanitarian missions. Smaller amounts, probably just enough to slip under the radar. But over the months, they added up to something much more significant. Hundreds of thousands of dollars quietly siphoned from my savings. My first thought was to call my bank, but I knew it wasn't enough. I needed answers. Someone had to be behind this, and I couldn't shake the sick feeling in my stomach that it was one of them, my family. I began tracing the paper trail. The deposits were all linked to accounts I recognized. My parents' joint account, Rebecca's name popping up here and there, even some withdrawals under my father's name that I had never authorized. Every transaction told a story I hadn't been a part of, one that revolved around betrayal, a betrayal I had never seen coming. I felt the bile rise in my throat. It wasn't just the money, it was the feeling of being so completely disregarded, so utterly unimportant. They had stolen from me while I was out in the world, giving everything I had to save strangers. And here they were, taking what was mine as though it meant nothing. I spent hours compiling everything, screenshotting bank statements, pulling up text messages that confirmed their involvement, looking for receipts and any evidence I could find to prove it. This wasn't just about money. This was about a pattern, a history of being used, of being the family's fallback option when they needed help. And I'd always been there, always said yes, thinking that it was just part of being family. But now, the truth was undeniable. My phone buzzed. It was my mother, a text that felt as though it had been written just for this moment. "Sarah, I hope you're okay. We've been going through some things and we could really use your help right now." I stared at the message, rage rising in my chest like a fire. Help? They had taken from me without a word, without a thought, and now they had the audacity to ask for more? I wasn't sure what hurt more, knowing they had stolen from me or the realization that they would never see me as anything more than a tool to be used, a resource to be drained. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I had everything I needed to confront them, and I wasn't going to let this go. This wasn't just about money. It was about me finally standing up for myself. It was time to take control. A few hours later, I was standing in front of my parents' house, the same house where I had spent so many years trying to please them, the place that had always been a symbol of family, of expectations. Today, it would be a battleground. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. I knew what was coming, and I wasn't prepared to back down this time. My father opened the door, his face unreadable. "Sarah," he said, his voice cold. "What's this about?" I didn't say anything at first. Instead, I handed him the folder of evidence I had compiled, bank statements, transaction details, and everything in between. "I know what you've been doing," I said quietly, my voice firm but calm. "I've tracked the money. You've been taking it from me, from my savings. I want to know why." He looked at the folder, his face pale, and I could see the flicker of guilt in his eyes, but he quickly masked it. "Sarah, it's not what you think," he started, his voice shaking slightly. "We've just been going through a rough time. Your mother and I—" "No," I interrupted, "you've been stealing from me." "And now you want to act like it's nothing?" The anger that had been simmering inside me for years erupted in that moment. "You never thought about me, did you? You just took it because you could." My mother appeared behind him, her face tight with concern. "Sarah, this isn't helping," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, let's talk about this calmly." I shook my head. "I've spent my whole life trying to prove myself to you, to make you proud. And this is how you repay me? By using me as your personal bank account?" Rebecca stepped into the room, her eyes wide. "What's going on?" she asked, as if she had no idea. I turned to her, finally acknowledging her presence. "You don't get to act innocent, Rebecca," I snapped. "You were part of this too." She blinked, her face twisting in surprise. I don't know what you're talking about." You've been taking from me too, Rebecca, I said coldly. It's all there. The transfers, the withdrawals. You've been draining my account while I've been out working myself to the bone. Her face turned white, but instead of apologizing, instead of feeling any sort of remorse, she crossed her arms and scoffed. You're being dramatic, Sarah. It's just money. I could feel the last shred of my patience snap. No, it's not just money. It's my life, my work, and you've been taking it for granted. I've been taking care of you all for years, and you've never once thought about what I need, what I want. I turned to my father. You can't keep hiding behind excuses. This is the last time I'm going to let you treat me like this. I'm done. And with that, I turned on my heel and walked out the door. They had stolen from me, and now I was taking back what was mine. No more. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. My mind raced, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I had done it. I had finally confronted them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to come. The way my father had looked at me, shocked, ashamed, but mostly scared. The way Rebecca had sneered at me, like my anger meant nothing. They thought I would back down. They thought I would walk away and let them get away with it. But this time was different. I spent the next couple of hours in my apartment pacing, trying to focus on anything but the thoughts that kept swirling in my head. They would come for me, I knew that. The guilt trips, the apologies that weren't really apologies, the excuses, and no matter how many times they said they were sorry, I knew the truth. They didn't see me. Not as a person, not as their daughter. I was just a resource to them, an easy solution when things got hard. It wasn't long before my phone buzzed. The message came from my mother. Sarah, please come home. We need to talk. We're sorry for what happened. We never meant to hurt you. Can we fix this? I stared at the screen. The words felt hollow. The apology didn't feel real. It never did with them. This was their pattern. Take, and then, when you finally stand up for yourself, they act like you're the one who's wrong. It was exhausting. But I didn't reply. I wasn't ready for a conversation that would just be more manipulation, more convincing me that it was all my fault. The phone rang again, this time my father. I let it ring out, staring at the screen without picking up. A few minutes later, the voicemail came through. Sarah, my father's voice cracked, and I could almost picture him standing there, uncomfortable, as he always was when he had to face any sort of real conversation. I don't know where this came from, but we never meant for you to feel this way. You've been a good daughter, and we've always appreciated you. Please, just come home. We need to fix this. I laughed bitterly. Fix this? It was too late for that. The voicemail ended, and just as I was about to put my phone down, it buzzed again. This time it was Rebecca. Sarah, you need to calm down. This isn't helping anyone. Mom and Dad are really upset. Can we just talk? You're overreacting. Overreacting? After everything I had just discovered, after what they'd taken from me? After years of being pushed aside for Rebecca and their business? No, I wasn't overreacting. I was done. I stood up, pacing the room again. What was I supposed to do? Just walk back in and pretend nothing had happened? Pretend I didn't know what they'd been doing behind my back? No. They had crossed a line, and I couldn't just go back to how things had been. There was no more apologizing for them, no more waiting for them to recognize my worth. If they couldn't see me for who I was, someone who had worked for everything she had, someone who deserved more than just to be used, then it was time for me to walk away, for good. I needed to make them see that this wasn't something they could fix with just a few words, that this was the end of their cycle, the end of me being their fallback, and I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into feeling guilty again. My phone buzzed one more time, and this time it wasn't a message, it was a call, from Rebecca. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. What do you want, Rebecca? There was a long pause on the other end before she spoke, and when she did, her voice was surprisingly soft. I'm sorry, I know I've been terrible to you, and I know you're hurt right now. But Sarah, you have to understand. Mom and Dad, they didn't mean to hurt you. They don't know how to show love the right way. I felt the anger rise again, but I kept my voice steady. They show love by stealing from me? By making me feel like I'm not even part of the family unless I'm paying their bills? She was silent for a moment, but then she let out a sigh. I know it's messed up. I don't have an excuse for them. I really don't. But please don't cut us out. Don't walk away. I need you. Do you? I asked, my voice cold now. Do you really need me, or do you just need my money? Because that's all you've ever needed, Rebecca. You don't care about me. You care about what I can do for you. Don't be like this, she snapped, her voice rising. You're blowing this way out of proportion. It's just money. Just money, Sarah. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Just money. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I'm not doing this anymore, Rebecca. You want to fix things? Start by seeing me. Start by acknowledging who I am, not just the person who writes checks for you to cash when you need something. I hung up without waiting for a response, and for the first time, I felt like I had done the right thing. My phone stayed silent for the rest of the night, and the next day, I packed my things, ready to leave the life I'd known. I wasn't going to be their backup anymore. They had to face the consequences of their own actions now. And I had to face the truth of what I had allowed for so long. I wasn't the one who needed to change. They were. The next few days passed in a haze of quiet resolve. I didn't hear from my parents. Not a word from Rebecca either. It was almost as if the silence between us had become a physical barrier, something I could touch and feel every time I walked through my apartment. I had made my decision. There was no turning back. I spent my time reading, working, and pushing forward with the legal steps I needed to take. The betrayal still simmered inside me, but I knew that action would be the only thing that could help me regain control over my life. My parents had always counted on my sense of duty to pull me back in, but not anymore. I was no longer willing to be their fallback option. I made a call to Rachel Kim, a lawyer I had worked with in the past during some of my volunteer work in legal clinics. She had always been smart, sharp, and determined, traits that I needed right now. We scheduled a meeting, and I knew I was ready. For the first time, I wasn't going to be passive about my family's actions. The meeting was set for the following week, but even in that time, I couldn't sit still. I wasn't just seeking legal help. I was preparing for war. The theft, the lies, the manipulation, it all needed to come out. I wasn't just going to recover the money they had taken from me. I was going to expose the pattern of emotional abuse that had followed me throughout my entire life. The night before the meeting, I stayed up late going through documents. Old receipts, bank statements, and texts, anything I had that could prove my case. My mind raced as I pieced it all together, feeling like a surgeon preparing for an operation. Every detail mattered, every transaction, every withdrawal. They had left a trail behind them, and I was going to follow it until I found the truth. The next morning, I met Rachel at her office. She was sitting at her desk reviewing a few files and looked up as I entered. She was the same as I remembered. Focused, professional, and no nonsense. "Sarah," she greeted me, offering a small but genuine smile. "How are you holding up?" I hesitated for a moment before sitting down across from her. "It's been a rough few days," I said quietly, "but I'm ready to move forward. I need to take action." Rachel nodded, not wasting any time on small talk. She opened a file and pushed it toward me. "I've already done some preliminary work, and I think we can build a strong case here. Let's go over the documents you've brought, and we'll decide on the next steps." I handed her the folder I had meticulously compiled, the bank statements, the transfers, the text exchanges with my family members, and even the emails where they'd asked for help. As she flipped through the pages, she glanced up occasionally, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is a lot," she said after a moment. "They didn't just take money, Sarah. This is about more than just financial theft. There's a pattern of emotional manipulation here, too." I nodded. "I know, and I need to stop letting them treat me like this. I've been helping them for years, trying to be the good daughter, the good sister. But every time I do, they use it against me. I can't keep letting them walk all over me." Rachel's expression softened as she set the documents aside. "You're doing the right thing. You've got the proof you need. We can move forward with a civil suit, recover the money, and put a stop to their behavior. It won't be easy, but you've already taken the hardest step, standing up for yourself." I looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. For so long, I had stayed silent, letting my family dictate my worth, letting them treat me like a tool to be used and discarded. But now, with Rachel's help, I was going to take control of my own story. We discussed the details for the next hour, how to proceed with the lawsuit, what documents I would need to gather next, and how to handle the emotional fallout from my family. Rachel was firm but gentle, guiding me through each step with clear direction. By the time we were finished, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't had in years. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about setting boundaries, about reclaiming my life and my self-respect. I'll have everything filed by the end of next week, Rachel said as we stood up to leave. You've got a solid case here, Sarah. You're doing something important, not just for yourself, but for anyone who's ever been taken advantage of by their family. I shook her hand, grateful for her support. Thank you, Rachel. I couldn't have done this without you. As I left the office, I felt a small but noticeable shift inside me. It wasn't over. It wasn't even close to over. But I was no longer walking through life as a passive participant in my own story. I was taking control. And that, for the first time, felt empowering. But as the days went by, the texts and calls from my family grew more desperate. They wanted to talk, to fix things. They wanted me to come back, to forgive them, as if nothing had happened. But I wasn't going to let them gaslight me anymore. I wasn't going to fall for their empty apologies. I was done. The legal battle was just beginning, and I was ready to fight. Weeks passed since my meeting with Rachel, and the lawsuit against my family began to take shape. I had felt a strange sense of peace in taking action. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to the chaos, they were going to answer for what they'd done. But even as I focused on my case, there was still something lingering in the back of my mind. My grandfather's estate. I had never thought much about it before. Granddad had passed away a few years ago, and I remembered him fondly, but his will had never been a topic of conversation. My parents had taken care of everything when he passed, handling the funeral, the legal matters, the inheritance, and I had never questioned it. I didn't even know where the will was kept. But now, as I dug deeper into my family's history of manipulation and deceit, I realized there was one more thing I had never thought to look into: my grandfather's will. I had been so focused on the betrayal and the theft from my own accounts that I hadn't considered how much more was at play. What if there was something there, some hidden detail or provision that could change everything? I needed to know. After a few hours of searching through my family's old documents, I found it. An old, leather-bound file tucked away in the back of a filing cabinet. It was dusty, with faded gold lettering on the spine that read, "Last Will and Testament of Arthur Ellis." I paused for a moment, hesitant. I hadn't even thought to check for it before, but now something inside me felt urgent. I opened the file and started to read. The will itself was straightforward at first: my grandfather's property, assets, and personal items divided among his children, including my mother. But as I flipped to the next page, something caught my eye, a clause near the end that I had never seen before. To my granddaughter, Sarah Ellis, I leave all of my remaining assets, including but not limited to my savings, investments, and any property not otherwise specified in this document. It is my wish that Sarah uses these resources for her continued education, professional growth, and any charitable work she sees fit. I blinked, rereading the words. My name, my grandfather, the one person in my family who had always believed in me, had left everything to me. The shock of it hit me like a tidal wave. All these years I had thought I was nothing to my family. I was the outsider, the one who didn't belong. But my grandfather, even in death, had seen me as worthy. He had known. He had trusted me. And yet my parents had hidden this from me. I could only imagine what they had done with the information, probably pocketing anything that had been left to me. I didn't even want to consider the thought of how they had manipulated the situation. The anger bubbled up again, this time with a new intensity. The family that had tried to erase me from their lives had known all along that my grandfather had believed in me. Had my parents tried to use the will to control me too? To prevent me from receiving what was rightfully mine? I slammed the file shut, my hands trembling. It was clear now they had been stealing from me for years. Not just money, but recognition, legacy, and love. And now, they had kept this from me too. I didn't waste time. I called Rachel immediately. "Rachel, I found something," I said, my voice tight with fury. "My grandfather's will. He left everything to me. But my parents never told me. They hid it from me." Rachel's voice was calm, but I could hear the wheels turning in her mind. "Sarah, this is huge. We need to look into this. This will give us leverage. You may be able to claim that inheritance and challenge your family's actions." I closed my eyes, the weight of it all sinking in. They've been lying to me for years, taking from me, and I never knew. Rachel's tone softened. "This is exactly why we're doing this, Sarah. It's time for you to take back what's yours." The next few days were a whirlwind. Rachel helped me gather all the necessary documents, and we made plans to confront my family. The truth was coming out, the lies would no longer stand. But as I prepared for the next step, I found myself reflecting on my relationship with my grandfather. He had always been the one person who believed in me, who saw my potential even when no one else did. I remembered the way he used to sit with me, telling me stories about how important it was to work hard, to never settle, and to always believe in myself. He had seen something in me that I had never been able to see in myself. Now his gift, his belief in me, was a reminder that I was worthy of success, worthy of love, and worthy of respect. I stood at the window looking out at the city, a sense of purpose settling over me. I had spent so many years trying to gain approval from people who would never see me for who I truly was. But now, I had the strength to stand up for myself, to claim what was mine, to demand the respect I had been denied for so long. With the will in hand, with the evidence of my family's betrayal, I was ready to finally confront the people who had torn me down and take back everything they had stolen. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for the first time, I felt like I had the power to win. The day of my grandfather's memorial arrived, and I found myself standing outside the church once again. But this time, it was different. I wasn't there to feel small or overlooked. I wasn't there to beg for acknowledgement from a family that had never given me the respect I deserved. I stood tall in my doctor's coat, the familiar weight of it comforting as I breathed in the crisp morning air. It was a stark contrast to the last time I had been at a family gathering, outside in my surgical scrubs, watching as my family shut me out of my father's memorial service. Today, I wasn't just an outsider looking in. I had power now, something I had never truly felt before. I could hear the murmurs of my family from inside the church, my mother's voice, as always, cutting through the rest. I knew they were all gathered inside, pretending everything was normal. My sister, probably in the front, laughing with the guests, acting as if everything was perfect. But I knew better. And today, everything was about to change. I glanced down at my phone one last time before slipping it into my pocket. Rachel had texted me earlier, giving me the final details of the legal documents and the timing of the filing. She had assured me that my case was solid, that the inheritance from my grandfather would be a pivotal part of the legal proceedings. The idea that my family had stolen from me and hidden this will from me, that would not go unnoticed. I stood outside for what felt like an eternity. The sounds of the church inside echoed in the back of my mind. My mother, Rebecca, the extended family, all pretending like nothing had ever happened. It was as if they thought they could go on with their lives as though I was still invisible, as though their lies didn't matter. And then, as if on cue, I saw them. 12 people walked toward me, all dressed in their surgical scrubs, just like they had been at my father's memorial service. But this time, it wasn't just my colleagues. This time, it was a show of solidarity. Dr. Thomas, my mentor, led the group, his face as calm as always, but with a look of quiet understanding in his eyes. I had made the choice to walk into the church with them, not as a daughter seeking approval from a family that didn't care, but as someone who had earned their respect. I wasn't going to let them decide my worth anymore. The group stopped just a few feet away, and Dr. Thomas looked at me with a slight nod. "Shall we go in?" he asked quietly. I nodded, the feeling of support from these doctors, my colleagues, my peers, grounding me. They were here because they saw me. They respected me, not because of my lineage, but because of my work, my dedication, and my achievements. And for the first time, I felt like I had everything I needed to face this. I walked with them to the doors of the church. My family was still inside, unaware of what was about to unfold. As we entered the church, the group parted as we walked down the aisle. I could hear the sharp intake of breath from the crowd, the quiet whispers that followed us as we made our way to the front. I could feel their eyes on me, but this time it didn't matter. I wasn't walking in there to beg for a place at the table. I was walking in there to claim what was mine. At the front of the church, my mother stood, looking at me with wide eyes. Rebecca, standing beside her, had the same smug expression she always wore when she thought she was the center of attention. My father's side of the family stood in the pews, their murmurs growing louder as they tried to make sense of the scene unfolding before them. I stood there for a moment, just taking it all in. My family had always made me feel like an outsider, but today, they couldn't ignore me. They couldn't pretend like I didn't exist. Dr. Thomas stepped forward, his eyes moving over the crowd as he turned to face me. With a calm voice, he spoke, his words carrying through the church. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Dr. Thomas, and I'm here today to pay my respects to Sarah Ellis, someone who has saved lives, who has worked tirelessly for the betterment of others, and who deserves to be acknowledged for everything she's achieved. A few people glanced at one another, confused by the sudden attention on me. But it wasn't just Dr. Thomas speaking for me. It was the fact that these 12 people, my colleagues, people who had worked with me, learned from me, and respected me, had chosen to make a statement. They were here to publicly acknowledge me, and in doing so, they were lifting me out of the shadows of my family's rejection. My mother's face flushed as she realized what was happening. Her eyes darted toward my father, whose expression was unreadable. Rebecca, still in her perfect little bubble, looked around, trying to make sense of the shift in energy, but she was silent, as if she couldn't quite understand why everyone's attention was on me. Rachel, my lawyer, appeared from the back of the church, walking slowly toward the front. She held a piece of paper, her posture confident as she reached us. She didn't hesitate. Her voice rang clear as she addressed the crowd. I am Rachel Kim, and I have been working with Sarah Ellis on some important legal matters regarding her family's estate. Today, I am here to read the will of Sarah's grandfather, Arthur Ellis. The room fell completely silent. The gasp that spread through the crowd was palpable. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her husband's arm, trying to mask the shock that was quickly turning to panic. Rachel held the paper up, her voice strong and unwavering as she read the will aloud, ensuring that every word was clear. To my granddaughter, Sarah Ellis, I leave all of my remaining assets, including but not limited to my savings, investments, and any property not otherwise specified in this document. I didn't need to hear the rest. The words were clear, and the truth was undeniable. My grandfather had left everything to me, and my family had hidden it from me, just like they had stolen from me. The room was still. My mother's face had gone pale, and I could see her fists clenching at her sides. Rebecca was staring at me now, her usual smugness replaced by confusion, disbelief. For the first time in my life, I wasn't begging for a place at the table. I was standing on my own, my head held high, my eyes clear. Dr. Thomas stepped back, giving me space. I turned to face my family, my voice steady, but cutting through the tension in the room. You wanted to erase me, to make me invisible. You thought I would never fight back. But here I am, standing in front of you, stronger, more capable, and more deserving of respect than you ever gave me. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Rebecca, still processing everything, stood frozen. The entire church was silent, waiting. I turned and nodded to my colleagues, my voice softening just for a moment. Thank you for being here, for seeing me, for acknowledging me. I walked out of the church, head held high, my heart racing but full. For the first time, I was no longer a shadow. I was finally visible. In the days that followed, I stayed true to my decision. I had exposed the truth. I had stood up for myself. And now, the silence that followed felt strangely comforting. It wasn't the hollow silence of being ignored, the type I had lived with for years. No, this was different. This was the silence of having no more battles to fight, the calm after the storm. I kept my head down at work, diving into my patients and my cases. The hospital, the one place where I had always felt seen, became my refuge once again. Dr. Thomas, my mentor, continued to offer quiet support, but there was no need for any more grand gestures. I had won the battle that had haunted me for so long, and for the first time in years, I could feel peace slowly settling into my bones. But even as the silence stretched, there were moments when the weight of everything I had done began to sink in. I had walked away from my family. I had cut ties with people who were supposed to love me, to be there for me, and yet all they had ever done was take my time, take my money, take my energy. And in return, they had given me nothing but rejection and dismissal. At first, I tried not to think about it. I tried to keep busy, filling my days with work and the things that had always mattered to me. But it wasn't long before the guilt started to creep in. What about the times when we were a family? When things had been easier before the betrayal, before the lies? What about the moments when I had wanted so desperately for them to see me, to be proud of me? I picked up the phone and stared at it, my fingers hovering over the screen. For a brief moment, I considered reaching out. Maybe I could be the bigger person. Maybe I could let them apologize. Maybe things could go back to normal. But then I remembered the will, the inheritance, the fact that they had stolen from me for years, not just money, but my time, my respect, my dignity. They hadn't just ignored me, they had tried to erase me. And no amount of apologies would ever make up for that. I put the phone down. I realized with a strange kind of clarity that I didn't need them. I didn't need their approval. their love, their false promises of change. I had built a life for myself, a life that didn't depend on them. I had earned everything I had, every accomplishment, every success, and that was enough. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into a new project. It was something I had always wanted to do, something that had been on my heart for a long time. I had the resources now, the time, and the freedom to make it happen. I called Rachel. I want to start a clinic, I told her. A free clinic for veterans. I've seen so many of them fall through the cracks, and I want to give them the care they deserve. Rachel was immediately on board. She helped me with the legalities, with setting up the necessary paperwork, and with finding a location. It wasn't easy and it wasn't fast, but every day I felt a little more certain that this was the right path for me. I named the clinic the Healing Hands Clinic, a place for those who had been overlooked like I once had been. It was small at first, just a few rooms, a few volunteers, but it grew quickly. The veterans who came in were grateful for the care, for the understanding, for the feeling that they mattered. And slowly, so did I. It wasn't just about the work I was doing, though that was important. It was about the people I was helping. I wasn't just saving lives in the operating room anymore. I was healing hearts, rebuilding trust, and giving people a second chance. In those quiet moments, when I looked around the clinic and saw the veterans chatting with one another, laughing, sharing stories, I realized that I was no longer the person I had been. I wasn't just a daughter trying to earn her place. I wasn't just a sister trying to be noticed. I wasn't a doctor defined by the expectations of others. I had found my purpose, and it wasn't about being seen by my family anymore. It was about being seen for the person I had become. One evening, after a particularly busy day at the clinic, I sat down in my office, exhausted but content. I picked up my phone and looked at the messages waiting for me. There were several from my mother and Rebecca. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the screen. But instead of opening their messages, I deleted them. I didn't need their guilt. I didn't need their apologies. I had found something better, peace. And with that peace, I knew I was finally free. The door to the clinic opened, and one of the veterans walked in, a smile on his face. "Dr. Ellis," he said, his voice rough but sincere, "I just wanted to thank you. This place, it's a lifesaver. You've done more for me than anyone else ever has." I smiled, the words that had been stuck in my throat for so long finally finding their way out. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means more than you know." As I looked at the man before me, I realized that I had found something that truly mattered. Something lasting, something real. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible anymore. Weeks turned into months. The Healing Hands Clinic had grown slowly but surely into a community space where veterans were treated with respect and dignity. The impact of it all was starting to sink in. Each new patient who walked through the door, each life that was touched, reminded me of why I had started this journey. But even as I found my purpose, I couldn't help but wonder how things would end with my family. I'd spent so much of my life looking for validation from them, chasing their approval, trying to fit into a mold that I had never been able to fit into. They had used me. They had stolen from me, emotionally and financially. And for the first time, I knew with certainty that I had done the right thing by cutting them off. And yet, despite my resolve, there was still a nagging feeling at the back of my mind. The silence had stretched for so long. The texts had stopped. The calls stopped coming. It was as though they had disappeared from my life completely. Then one morning, as I was preparing for the day at the clinic, my phone buzzed. It was a letter, a physical letter, the kind that only arrived when something was serious. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized the handwriting. My father's. I hadn't heard from him in months. The last time we spoke, he had begged me to come back, to fix things, but I hadn't responded. I hadn't even opened the door to their apology. I sat down at my desk and opened the letter, my fingers trembling just slightly. It wasn't long, but it was enough. "Sarah, I want to apologize for the way things have gone. I know you're angry, and I know you have every right to be. But please understand, we never wanted to hurt you. We didn't know how to fix things, how to make it right. I can't change the past, but I can acknowledge it now. We are sorry. I am sorry, and I hope in time we can find a way back to each other. I know I can't ask you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I have always loved you, and I am proud of everything you've done. Your mother is not well. She's been struggling with this more than you know, but I believe she has learned from her mistakes. I hope one day we can find our way back to being a family again." please think about this. Dad. I stared at the letter, feeling an odd sense of closure wash over me. It wasn't an apology I had been waiting for, and it wasn't the healing balm I had once hoped for. But it was something. For the first time in a long time, my father had acknowledged the hurt, had acknowledged the years of manipulation and control. I closed the letter and placed it down on the desk, my thoughts swirling. A part of me wanted to reach out, to respond, to ask questions and demand answers. I wanted to confront him, to make him understand just how deep the betrayal went, but another part of me knew that I didn't need to. I didn't need their approval. I had spent too much of my life chasing something I would never get from them. My father's words were an apology, yes, but it was also a recognition of who I had become, a woman who no longer needed them to define her. I glanced up at the wall of the clinic. The photographs of the veterans, the thank you notes from the families of those I had helped, it was all the validation I needed. I had already found my family. They were the ones who respected me, who saw me for who I truly was. My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. This time, it was a message from one of the veterans who had become a regular at the clinic. It was short, but it made me smile. Dr. Ellis, I can't thank you enough. You saved my life. This clinic, it's a miracle. I finally feel seen. Thank you for everything. I sat back in my chair, letting the words sink in. This was my legacy. This was my family. As the day wore on and patients came and went, I thought about what my father had said, about wanting to find a way back to each other. I didn't know if I could ever go back to that version of myself, the one who had allowed them to dictate my worth. But I didn't need to. I didn't need them to give me permission to be proud of myself, to find peace with who I was. I was healing others now, just as I had healed myself, and that was enough. It had always been enough. Later that evening, after I had closed the clinic for the night, I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at the building. The weight of everything, my family, the betrayal, the victories, felt light for the first time. I had taken control of my story. I had built something from the ground up. I had found my peace, not through reconciliation with my family, but through serving others and choosing to live for myself. The phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from Rachel. You're doing great, Sarah. The case is moving forward. You're going to get what's yours, but you're already the winner here. I smiled as I typed a quick response. I know, thank you for everything. The moment I hit send, I realized it was true. I had won, not through fighting or proving anything to anyone, but by choosing to stand on my own 2 feet, by finding my own worth. As I drove home that night, I felt a sense of peace settle in my chest. The road ahead was mine to take, and for the first time, I knew it would be the one I chose.